Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and we're doing yet another top 30 of my favorite games on each console, and this time we're doing the Super Nintendo, one of the very first consoles that I ever owned. And like always with these videos, trying to set this all up was pretty damn hard. And as always, I can't mention everything because I'm pretty sure there is more than 30 games released on the console, and on top of that too, I don't want this to be a 10-hour long video just listing off a bunch of random games, and just because I rank a game higher than another one doesn't automatically mean I think it's like better than it in every way possible, so I wouldn't take the ranking too seriously. These are just 30 games on the system that I just really love a whole lot, and I think are definitely worth checking out. So without further ado, let's begin the list, and at number 30, we have is Pieces from Atlas. Yeah, we're starting off with a weird puzzle game, but this is a puzzle game that I actually really love a whole lot. So it is a puzzle battler game, kind of similar to Tetris Attack or Puya Puya, but instead of dropping blocks, instead, you're actually trying to create a jigsaw puzzle. And whoever completes the jigsaw puzzles wins, and of course, there's a lot of like power-ups and attacks that you can do to your opponent, which does make it more interesting. Now, I know this is not going to be a super action-packed game that's going to appeal to everyone. As someone that grew up playing with a bunch of different jigsaw puzzles with my family, I actually found this game to be very fun, very addicting, and also very unique for the genre. So if you like puzzle games, I think it's one that is worth a look. And at number 29, we have is Skyblazer. So this is an action platforming game, and it certainly won't be the last action platformer we're going to be talking about here. So you play as this cool looking blue guy who can jump off of walls and do some different projectile moves that cost energy. And I always found this game kind of feels like a Mega Man X game, but if it was more focused on hand-to-hand combat. Because even some of the level design ideas even kind of remind me of the Mega Man games, like the disappearing blocks for an example, and I actually find them to be a lot harder in this game. Also, I'd just go out and say that this is a pretty damn difficult game, but every time I play it though, I always still manage to have fun with it. But it also helps too that it has some really nice graphics and music that I really like a lot. And I would say for me personally, it probably is one of my favorite games from Sony ImageSoft on the Super Nintendo. And as for number 28, we have is Run Saber. Yet another game that is kind of similar with the whole running and jumping and climbing up on walls, but this one kind of feels more like Strider. And it looks very similar to it too, so yeah, this is pretty much the Super Nintendo version of a Strider game, the closest you'll get, and I think it's actually a really damn good one. Has a lot of really cool backgrounds and set pieces you get to go to. I really like the one where you get to fight the thing on the jet and it just like goes all around. That's like some really over-the-top stuff. And the boss battles are really badass looking, and there's one that always sticks out to me the most, and that happens to be this skeleton princess one that I always thought looked really awesome. And the game is very fair and forgiving, and it's also not too hard of a game either, at least on easy mode. Normal mode, yeah, it is a little bit difficult, but even on normal mode, it's not bullshit hard or anything. I still remember the very first time that I played through this whole game was actually a couple years ago, and yeah, I would do it all over again, because it was actually a really fun time. Alright, and as for number 27, we have is Hagane the Final Conflict. So this is a game that I actually reviewed on my channel very, very early, and yeah, knowing that it is a very early video, yeah, it's not very good, and I don't recommend watching it. But what I do recommend is trying out this game, even though it is pretty damn hard. So anyways, this is one of those games that it is a lot more well known now, mainly because of like the rarity and why it's like such an expensive ass game with a dope cover art. But forget all that shit for a moment and just look at it as a game, and you know what? It's actually pretty damn good, even though it is really damn hard. Yes, even playing this game all these years later, I'm still not particularly great at it, but I have gotten a lot farther than I originally did, and when you do overcome a lot of these really hard parts, it really is satisfying and just makes you feel like a real man. Because the controls in the game are good, and you do have a lot of like fun weapons to play around with, and of course the graphics and the music are just really top-notch stuff that I just really love a whole lot. And I know there was an indie game that came out in recent years that looks very similar to this. It was called Vengeful Guardian Moonrider, and that game is also really badass too, so it's cool that a game like this inspired many other games that come out years later. And as for number 26, we have is Shin Megami Tensei 2. Yeah, finally, we're talking about an RPG. Now, when it comes to the Shin Megami Tensei series, I've been a fan of them for quite a number of years now. I mainly started with the PS2 era ones. Okay, well, technically my first one was Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, but I didn't get far into that one, where I feel like it was the PS2 era ones with obviously the Persona games and Digital Devil Saga and, Devil Summoner. Those were the ones that I put a lot of time into, and I was like, man, like, this is, like, really good stuff. So I was always curious about checking out, like, the older titles that were fan-translated, and I remember I first played Shin Megami Tensei 1 on Super Nintendo, and I remember dying on, like, the second encounter in one shot, and I was like, oh, so you're one of these kind of games, huh? So because of that, I didn't really spend much time with them. It wasn't until Shin Megami Tensei 2 is where I started to actually spend a lot more time with it, and yeah, I actually really got into this game a lot. So the first thing I will get out of the way that, yes, this game is still not an easy game by any stretch, but I do find that it's a lot easier to get started and to really get going with the game. But yeah, I always thought that the set pieces were really cool, like it's like a futuristic, cyberpunk looking world. The music is really awesome, I really love it a whole lot. And I always liked the dungeon crawler aspect too. I don't know, I really always liked first person dungeon crawlers where you go through a maze. I don't know, there's always something about them that I just really like. And the battles in this game are also not too slow either, especially with the help of that auto attack. So for an early Shin Megami Tensei game, I gotta say, it's not that archaic. So yeah, if you're gonna play an early SMT game on the Super Nintendo, I do think 2 is an easier one to start with, where I feel like 1, I just think starts out way too hard. And I never tried out If before, so I don't know how that one is. I only played a little tiny bit of Majin Tensei, the strategy RPG versions that they have here. But from the tiny bit I played of one of them, they did seem kinda interesting. So yeah, that's my Shin Megami Tensei pick. And as for number 25, we have is Super Valis 4. Yep, I'm mentioning another Valis game in one of my top 30 videos, but this one is a pretty different version of 4 on the PC Engine CD, where they both follow the same basic storyline and they have the same settings, but the level designs are different, and of course in the PC Engine CD version you can play as more characters, where in this one you're only stuck with the one character. I find this to be very similar to Rondo of Blood vs. Dracula X, where they're the same game kinda, but they do have some major differences, and this game is pretty much like that too. But despite this game being a little bit of a downgrade compared to the PC Engine version, I still think this Super Nintendo version is still really good. Like, the music, sure, may not have the same level of quality as a CD game, but at least it does still sound very good, very catchy, and I just love it a whole lot. It still might be one of my favorite soundtracks on a Super Nintendo. And yeah, pretty much like I said about every other Valis game, I just find them to be very fun, challenging, but very fun to overcome. And you get some really cool and unique enemies to fight up against, like you get to fight a knight riding a tiger, which is fucking awesome. It is overall still a very good game on its own. Alright, and as for number 24, we have is Ghost Sweeper Mikami. So this is a game that is based after a comedy horror anime from the 90s, and it's a very fun action platformer, very similar to Super Valis 4 in many ways, where you have both melee and projectile weapons and upgrades to use, lots of random enemies you get to fight, and some of them have some very funny animations. And the graphics in the game I just find to be very charming. Like, not only do they look good, but they actually fit the show very well. And yeah, I find it to be a pretty chill game for the most part. Now yeah, there are some later sections of the game where it does get a little bit hard, but it's never bullshit hard. I'll say this, as much as I love Super Valis 4, I feel like this game is a lot easier, and is overall a very good anime-based video game. And as for number 23, we have is Violinist of Hamelin, yet another game based after an anime, but this one is based after a very obscure one, which does make it pretty cool. And I have covered this game years ago on the channel, but I'll go over a couple things here since it is a pretty old video, and it's one that I haven't seen in a long time, so I don't know if it still holds up or not, but I do remember saying that I did love the game a lot. So you play as a violinist named Hamlin, and he has a little partner girl with him. I forget her name off the top of my head because it's been a while. So she keeps bugging him to save the city, but he doesn't want to do it. Then he's all like, fine, I'll do it. But when he does, though, he basically like torments her the whole time by putting her into a bunch of random costumes that are really embarrassing. So it is an action platformer with some puzzle elements where you gotta put her into different costumes, and the different costumes all have their different abilities, so of course to get through certain areas you gotta put her into the right one, and that's pretty much the core of the game. Yeah, it's a very chill platformer that I find to be very fun and very funny too, because some of the costumes you get to put her into are just so ridiculously stupid, and it's very fitting to the anime too. Well, at least the OVA movie, that is, because, well, I'm not going to get into it here, but the movie and the TV show had very completely different tones, which is interesting. So yeah, if you really like some puzzle platformers where you gotta do some problem solving with unique ways, I found this to be a very enjoyable game that not a lot of people talk about. And as always, it's really cool to see an obscure anime get a game, and the game is actually good. Really wish we had more stuff like that happen more often, but oh well, that's another discussion for another day. And as for number 22, we have is Sonic Blast Man 2. Yeah, we got a Sonic game on here. Okay, well, obviously it has nothing to do with the Sonic you're thinking of, but yeah, Sonic Blast Man. And I always found this to be a really good beat-em-up that is pretty underrated. And the first game is pretty good too, but I like the second one a lot more for that. Not only does it have a lot more better control and speed of the game, and has a lot more enemies on screen, the game also has co-op, and you can have 3 characters to play as. So yeah, it's very much improved, and it still looks and sounds really good too. So yeah, I don't think I need to say much about this game, as I really do enjoy a good solid 2D beat 'em up, and this one is, honestly, I almost like it as much as some of the Final Fight games on Super Nintendo. I do think it is that fun. And as for number 21, we have is Outcast. Now this was a Japan-only game that was done by HAL Laboratory. In fact, it even still has the same composer that did the music for the Kirby games, which is amazing, and yeah, let me tell you, the music in this game is just absolutely fantastic. So this is a top-down action game, and it does have some RPG elements, but nothing super crazy heavy. And your character's clothing will change color depending on the type of weapon that you're using, and of course, if you charge up the shots, then you have different types of attack patterns to use. Yeah, one thing that is important to note is that it's better to attack enemies by holding and charging up your attack, where if you just keep swinging your sword like you normally would in any other game like this, you're not going to do very much damage. Yeah, it took me a little bit to kind of get the hang of that, but once you do though, it is actually pretty fun. And one thing that I really love about this game is the amount of craziness that the game has. So it starts out with like a medieval fantasy world, which is pretty typical and cool, and you know, the graphics in the game look really nice too. But as you get farther through the game, it starts to get a lot more crazier, like you get to go on a flying ship, and the partner that you get for that section happens to be a robot guy that kind of looks a little bit like RoboCop, sort of, and it's pretty awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of other crazy stuff in the game too, but I don't want to spoil too much there, but even that alone should just be like, yeah, they aren't fucking around here. But yeah, I should also say too that there is a partner system in the game, and it always changes depending on what level you're on, and yeah, some of the partners have some really cool attack patterns they can do. So yeah, this was a very enjoyable game that I really liked a whole lot, and I played and beat this game earlier this year, and I was pleasantly surprised how much I liked it. But I'll probably talk more about it on the games I beat in 2024. Alright, and as for number 20, we have is our first very well-known popular game, and that happens to be Star Fox. Yeah, so this is one of those games that I really don't need to say much about it, but yes, it's a very good, fun game that's just easy to pick up and play anytime you want, even though the graphics were very impressive for the time. Nowadays, yeah, it may not look the greatest to look at now, but it's still kind of amusing and interesting. But the music is still some of the best ever on the system. So yeah, let's just get moving on, because I'm pretty sure everyone that knows what a Super Nintendo is knows what Star Fox is, and if you don't, then how did you make it here? And as for number 19, we have is Macross Scrambled Valkyrie. Another game based after an anime, and an anime that I consider to be one of my all-time favorites, and they made it into a shoot-'em-up, and it's a damn good one too. And I remember doing a video on games based after Macross, and this was one of them in there, and yeah, it's definitely my favorite out of the 3 that I remember talking about. But yes, it is a shoot-'em-up that does look really good, also has a really hype soundtrack, and I remember the difficulty being not too insanely hard either for shoot-'em-up standards, which I do appreciate. But yeah, even though the Super Nintendo may have not gotten a lot of shoot 'em ups compared to the TurboGrafx and the Genesis, it still has some good ones, and this one is easily one of my favorites. And as for number 18, we have is ActRaiser. This is a pretty early release Super Nintendo game that I still think is really good and still very unique in its own ways, where it combines two things: action platforming levels while also having a town management sim. And I do find that the town management sim in this game is not too complicated to pick up and play, and I find it to be strangely relaxing. So it does have a little bit of a creativity outlet to it, for that you can place towns and pathways wherever you want, and then of course you also get to defend your people from being attacked by these little demons that will pick up your people. And when you surround the monster hideout, that's when you get to do the side-scrolling stages, which are also very fun too, and I really enjoy them. And the music for this game I still think is like really damn good too, so yeah, I still really like this game. I still think it's very unique, and it's really unfortunate that the second game was a disappointment, for that they removed the town elements to it. And as for number 17, we have is another very popular one, and that is Super Metroid. Yet another game that I really don't need to go too much in depth into, but I will go out and say that, as much as I do love this game, I am not very good at it. I was never good at these kind of like side-scrolling exploration games, because I always get lost all the time, or I always forget where like things are, so yeah, it's one of those things that I am always constantly struggling with, but you know, just because I'm not good at a game doesn't mean I can't love it, because no, I do think this game is really cool and awesome, and I really love the atmosphere of the game. That shit is just top-notch. And it also just looks really badass and beautiful as well. Yes, you can look badass and beautiful at the same time, and this game definitely proves that. So yeah, I won't yammer on about all the stuff you already know about it, but yes, it's a great game that I do really love, but I wish I was better at it. But hopefully one of these days I'll overcome it before I die. And as for number 16, we have is Turtles in Time. Yeah, we're finally talking about a Ninja Turtle game, and this one is definitely one of the best ones I've played. Not only is it just a very fun beat-em-up, but it's a very good version of the game. There's actually certain things about this version that are actually better than the arcade. So yeah, using all four of the different turtles with their weapons is always fun, and being able to throw all the enemies up onto the screen is cool and funny. And there's some really cool set pieces you get to go to as well, which I really like a lot. So yeah, not much else to say here, because as again, this is another game that I feel like is very well known for the system, and well, for a good reason. It's one of the few games based after a TV show that was done really well. And as for number 15, we have is Magical Poppin'. This is a game I didn't play until somewhat recent years, and I gotta say, this game is pretty damn enjoyable. So at first glance you'd be looking at this and thinking, what are you using, Blue Link? Yeah, she definitely does look like Link if she was blue. Well anyways, it is a stage-based platformer, but what's interesting is that the level design does have a lot of secrets or areas that look like you can access through other ways, and it seems like that the game could be a Metroidvania, but it really isn't one, but it kind of has level designs that kind of remind me of one, but without it being super confusing. So yeah, you run around, you swing your sword at people, you also have different type of projectile shots, and you learn more of them throughout the game. The graphics are really nice and charming, and there's a lot of different unique enemies you get to fight. And the game is challenging, but I do think it is forgiving enough that it is still very fun and enjoyable. And hopefully one of these days I'll try to complete this game, but even as of right now though, it is still very fun and worth trying. And as for number 14, we have is Suikoden Setsu 3, or should I say Trials of Mana now, because yeah, I was just so used to calling it the original Japanese name for the longest time. But yeah, when it comes to the Mana games on the system, this one I think is easily the best one. Has some great graphics and music as you would expect, and also the gameplay just feels a lot better, and I also feel like that the inventory management is not as bad in this one. And being able to play as 3 different characters you get to pick does make the game pretty interesting with the different play styles, though of course my favorite of the 3 happens to be Duran, Angela, and Rizia. If I could pick a 4th character, I'd pick Hawkeye, because he is also pretty cool too. So knowing this, the game does have a lot of replay value with different class setups. But yeah, what else can I say about the game? I mean, the characters are really cool. I think the story is pretty decent for what it is. I mean, it's nothing super amazing, but it's pretty fun and charming. And it is just a very fun top-down action RPG that I really liked a lot, and I really need to finish it one of these days. I don't remember if I have my original file or not, but I might just say screw it and just start all over again. And hell, also, I never played the remake version either, which also does look good, but I really need to complete the original version first. But yeah, I do think it is a really cool game that we actually did get an official release of it over here, like, years later, because back in the day, we obviously didn't get it. But it's great that a lot more people now have been playing it, and yeah, it's a good game that we definitely deserved getting years ago. And as for number 13, we have is one of the Final Fight games, and it's really hard for me to pick which one is my favorite because I love 2 and 3 almost the same. And the first one I do like, but the Super Nintendo version is not my favorite version of the game. There's a lot of other versions that I'd rather play, such as the arcade, the Sega CD version with its amazing soundtrack, and the Sharp 68000 version is also really good too. But strictly speaking for Super Nintendo though, I could take 2 or 3. Like I said, I love both of them. They're both just really good, fun beat-em-ups that I just never get tired of. Yeah, not much else to add here that I've already said about all these other fun beat-em-ups that I love on the system, but yeah, these ones are definitely top tier for sure. And as for number 12, we have is Ganpuru Gunman's Proof. So this is a quirky little Zelda-style game where instead of taking place in a medieval fantasy, it's a Wild West setting, which I find to be pretty unique for this style. The game also has a nice art style that is a little bit on the light-hearted side, but I think it fits the game well. And I also found the game to be pretty chill for the most part. It's not super difficult from what I remember playing of it. It has been a while since I've actually properly played it, but I do remember it being a pretty good chill time that is very enjoyable, and I think a lot of people that do like Legend of Zelda would appreciate this game. It has a lot of charm, and it has a lot of uniqueness that does make it very fun. And now, as for number 11, we have is one of the Fire Emblem games. Now, there's 3 of these games, well, technically 4 if you count the Saddle of You game, but we're not going to count that one. But, so yeah, there's the 3, but I only played 2 of them, that being Mystery of the Emblem and Genealogy of Holy War. Yeah, I've never played Tracia 776. I know that game has a very dedicated fan base to it, but for some reason I just never tried it. I will one day, but for now, I gotta talk about one of the other 2 that I played, and I think the one that I liked the most was Genealogy of Holy War. Yeah, this was the one that I remember putting a decent amount of time into, and I was actually really liking it. And yes, even at the time when I played it, I was playing a version of the game where the fan translation was barely finished. But that didn't stop me from enjoying the game though, because just like a lot of other games in the series, I do enjoy this one quite a bit for that it also has a very interesting challenge. I don't think I really need to explain it as it is pretty well known, but yeah, all these early Fire Emblem games were known for being pretty difficult because, you know, your characters can actually die for good. But aside from that though, the other thing I do like about the Fire Emblem games is that the battles are usually not too slow, which I find to be pretty impressive for a really old tactical RPG series, because that is the one thing with a lot of strategy RPGs, is that sometimes the battles can feel like they can take forever to get through. Where this one, I don't think it's too bad with it. Now, yeah, obviously there's going to be some missions way later on in the game where they throw out like a shitload of dudes at you, but for the most part, the other usual missions that you gotta do don't feel like they take forever to do, and I do find them to be just very fun. I definitely should try to go back and like replay through more of this game now that there is a better translation out there. Alright, and now we're moving on to number 10, and that happens to be Mega Man X. And I just realized it's kind of ironic that I put Mega Man X in the 10 spot, because I remember years ago people used to think that Mega Man X meant 10, because, you know, X is 10 in Roman numerals. Though I'm pretty sure most people have stopped thinking about that ever since they actually made a Mega Man 10. But it's still amusing to me that people actually thought that. But anyways though, yeah, Mega Man X, we're gonna be talking about the first X, because that is probably my favorite one on the Super Nintendo. And I also really like X2 quite a bit. And X3 I do remember being like kinda good, but definitely not nearly as memorable as the first 2. But it has been a long time since I played it though, but X is the most iconic one to me, and it's the one that I played the most of, and I've always really enjoyed this game. I don't really think I need to go too much into detail about like Mega Man X and why it's so different from the classic series, but I've always loved the way these games look. They have a very edgier vibe to them, which I've always dug. And the music sounded a lot heavier with its rock and metal sounds, which I really love a whole lot. And as much as I love this game, I still don't consider myself to be a good Mega Man player or a good Mega Man X player by any means, but I was quite proud of myself that I managed to make it to Sigma's hideout, which was hard enough for me to get to. And like I said about Super Metroid, it's another one of those games that I hope I will beat someday. But even as it is, I still love this game and its series a whole lot. And at number 9, we have is Pocky and Rocky. Yeah, speaking of games that are really hard that I still haven't beaten yet, yeah, this is definitely one of them, but it's one that I've also really loved a whole lot. It's a top-down run-and-gun shooter that has a really cool Japanese setting that looks really great. I also really love the music a lot, and the game is just really fast-paced and fun, but like I said, it is definitely really damn difficult. And I remember one time I actually made it to stage 5, which by the way, that's not even the final stage of the game, and yet that one is still crazy hard. But no matter how many times I died throughout this game, I always still go back to it, and I always have just as much fun as I did the last time. And playing the game with 2 players is also just a hell of a good time too. But I guess I should also comment on, too, that the second Pocky and Rocky on the Super Nintendo is also really good, too, and there is a couple things about that one I do like better, but then there's other things that I don't like as much, so it's a little bit hard to say if I like it really better or not, but the first one is the one that I put way more time into. But I do think both games are very good and fun, just, you know, be careful that you are gonna die a lot throughout them. And as for number 8, we have is Knights of the Round. Another very fun beat-em-up that I've always really loved for that it has a really cool medieval fantasy setting, and of course, the biggest thing is that you can level up your character in the game, and that is something that really adds a lot more to the game, which I think is really great. And plenty of other 3D beat-em-ups and hack and slashes that came way later were definitely inspired by this, I'm sure. But yeah, just like I said about Final Fight 2 and 3, yeah, this is just another one that is just always a good time, and it never gets old for me. And for number 7, we have is Sunset Riders. Now this is a badass game that I'm always gonna love and go back to. It's basically just like the old classic Contra games, where it's fast-paced shooting, run and gun, but with cowboys, and it's just really awesome. And the Super Nintendo port is actually done really well too. Obviously the arcade version is better for that it has more like cooler animations and such, but even with this is still a very, very good version that I really have no complaints with. Like the game has a lot of nice bright colors which look great, and the game's music is just really hype, like it really gets you pumped. And just like many other games I've talked about, yes, the game is pretty difficult at times, but it is very satisfying to overcome those challenges. So yeah, if you really love Contra, you'll definitely love this, I think. And as for number 6, we have is our Mario entry. Now this is where it's gonna get kinda hard, because this is where the Mario series started to add in some spin-off games. And I try to be fair, where I want to at least add 1 game per franchise, because, you know, I don't want to add in like 5 games in the same series, filling up the list. So I'll just leave this one as Super Mario World. Yeah, not a big surprise, but I mean, hey, like, how could you go wrong? So yeah, I still remember the very first time I played this game. It was definitely one of the earliest games I remember playing, and yeah, it was quite mind-blowing. I always loved the way that the map looked, I always thought it looked really cool. And the game has a lot of different secrets, which were always fun to discover. So yeah, that's all I'm gonna say about this one, as, you know, there's really not much else to say that hasn't been said before, but yeah, it's great. And yes, there are other Mario games I easily could have put in here, like Yoshi's Island I also think is great, and then there's also Super Mario RPG is also another really good one as well. So let's get moving on and start talking about number 5, and that happens to be my Final Fantasy pick. And I have played all 3 of them that were released on the Super Nintendo, and I think they're all really good. But I think the one I'm gonna pick today is gonna be Final Fantasy VI, which that also might not surprise some people. But I will briefly say about 4 is that one is a pretty strong entry, and I also really like the story and the characters, mainly Cecil and Kane I thought were really great characters. And then there's 5, which I also really like a whole lot too, and that one is just great for having the cool job system, which was fun to mess with. But as for 6 though, this is the one that I think works best for me consistently. I feel like the game still looks really great with its 2D art style. Also, the game's soundtrack is just amazing as ever, and I still think it is one of the best things that Uematsu has ever done. And I really love all the main party members that you get. Now, one thing I actually didn't think about until just recently was that when I really think about it, Final Fantasy VI is one of the few games that I actually like just about every single character that you get in your party. Because I know in some of the later ones, there's always at least one or two characters that you either don't care about or you just straight up just don't like at all. But in this game, yeah, I like pretty much everyone. Now obviously there's gonna be some I love more than others, but even my lesser favorites are still like not bad characters at all. And of course, since we're talking about characters, we gotta talk about Kefka, the main villain, and yeah, he's definitely one of my all-time favorites too. He has a lot of dialogue that's very memorable and fun, and he's the perfect heel character that you love to hate. And yeah, I can talk a lot more about it though, but you know, we'd be here forever. And of course, this is a game that I haven't played since 2007. But even after all that time, I still remember a lot. But now it really makes me wish I could play it all over again because it has been such a long time. And funny enough, the very first time I played this game, I played it with a freaking keyboard. Yeah, it was before I knew that USB controllers were a thing. So yeah, let's get moving on to number 4, and that happens to be yet another RPG, and that is Chrono Trigger. So like I just said about Final Fantasy VI, it's another game where I pretty much love every single main character in the game. They're all very memorable characters that have a lot of fun things going on for them. And also the whole plot and the story I also think is really good too. Now yeah, I know it's another like typical time travel story, but I just think the way how it's done here was just really cool and just a hell of a good time. And the music, like, holy shit, the music is just like phenomenal as again. And that forest theme is still one of my all-time favorite songs in the game, and just one of my all-time favorite forest theme music in video games ever. And the music intro, as soon as you boot up the game and you see that pendulum swinging, man, that shit still gives me goosebumps, no joke. And yeah, there's like so many other things I could comment on, but you know, we'd be here forever, and you know, we got a couple more left to talk about, but yes, Chrono Trigger is a classic for a reason, and I still think it does hold up. And as for number 3, we have is Super Castlevania 4. Yes, my all-time favorite Castlevania game right here. Now, despite this game having 4 in the name, it's more or less a remake of the first game than a sequel to the third game, but I mean, hey, whatever, this game is amazing. Like, the controls in the game are some of the best at the time when this game came out for a Castlevania game, and like I said about Super Metroid, this is yet another game that looks badass and beautiful at the same time, and also has some excellent atmosphere with many parts. Because the music, as again, is also just flat out amazing with so much variety. Like, you got some great atmospheric tracks, you got some really catchy stuff, and you also got some dark and menacing, more badass tracks. And the difficulty, I think, is just right for this game. Now, I still wouldn't say it's an easy game, but compared to all the other classic-style Castlevania games around this time, I do think it is the most easy and accessible one that is the most fair. And even though I have beaten the game once before, every time I replay it, I still have just as much as a great time. And I still consider beating this game to be one of the best highlights that I've had when it comes to beating many different video games, because for the longest time, I never thought I could ever beat a Castlevania game. And here I am still trying to beat more of them, but the numbers haven't really pumped that high, because, you know, I still don't consider myself to be a good Castlevania player, but the fact that I did beat this game once, well, I'm happy with that. Alright, now let's get moving on to number 2, and that happens to be Zelda: Link to the Past. Another classic game that I really don't need to say a whole lot on, but yes, I really loved this game a lot growing up, and I still do to this day. The whole idea of there being a light world and a dark world, I always just thought it was a really cool concept, and yes, this was actually the very first Zelda game I ever played, so the fact that this was my first impression of a Zelda game, yeah, that was just fantastic. And I still remember that one summer where it was me, my sister, and 2 of my cousins. What we'd do is that we'd go swimming in the afternoon, and when we'd come back, we'd just go back and play some video games, and Zelda was the biggest priority that we tried to play through. And man, we had so much like fun like discussions and little like theories about the game. It'd be here forever, I explained all of them, but probably one of the biggest ones that I can name real quickly is that I remember the very first time where you get to go to the Dark World and you don't have the moon crystal, so therefore you're stuck as a pink bunny. I remember when I seen that happen, I thought it was kind of scary, especially with the music that would play in the background. And speaking of scary stuff in the game, I always found that the cave music in this game was way more creepier than it had any right to being. And there's just so many cool dungeons in this game. Like, I really love the one that's in the forest. I also thought that the one in the town was kind of cool. Like, the fact that there's like a dungeon in the middle of a town, I thought was just really cool and unique. Now, you gotta remember, I did play this game before Zelda 2, which also had that, and even then, I didn't even get anywhere near that far into the game at the time. And lastly I'll mention is the Turtle Castle on Death Mountain was also a very interesting one as well, that was also really damn hard. I remember that one got us stumped for a very long time. But yeah, I can gush about so many random things about this game, but, you know, we'd be here for like a million years, so let's just get moving on and start talking about the honorable mentions. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, I can't list every single game on the damn console, and I mean, even if I could, I mean, what, you want me to even mention shitty games like Captain Novolin? Nah, of course not. Well, maybe I just did for a second there, but anyways, the point is that, yeah, I can't mention every single great game on the system. As much as I would love to, I just can't. So, let's get it over with. So there is Aero Fighters, Blazion, the Bio-Cyborg Challenge, Brandish 2, the Planet Buster, the very first Clock Tower game, Demon's Crest, The Fireman from Human Entertainment, the very first F-Zero, Hyper Ira based after the anime series, Illusion of Gaia and Soul Blazer, The Legend of the Mystical Ninja, Secrets of Evermore, The Twisted Tale of Spike McFang, and finally I'll mention is Zombies Ate My Neighbor, and yeah, that's what gonna do it for now. Yeah, I'm sure some people are still gonna cry about me not mentioning their favorite game, which, I mean, there's a chance I might love it, I just, you know, like, I just can't list everything. So, without further ado, let's get to the number one spot, and anyone that has been on my channel long enough, you probably know what it is. It's not a surprise at all, and it happens to be Donkey Kong Country. And as far as I can remember, I think this might have been the very first video game that I've ever played. I'm pretty sure it was this. If it wasn't this, it might have been Super Mario All-Stars. But I'm pretty sure it was this, because I definitely do remember playing this game in the living room. But yeah, I don't really need to explain why this game is great. Graphically, it just looks really damn good and impressive, and the music is just some of the best you'll ever hear on the system. And it's one of the very few games that I can actually tear through the whole thing really quickly. And as again, like I said with Link to the Past, this is another game that me and my family used to play all the time. We used to have a lot of funny stories about it. Like, one that I can say quickly, and this has to do with the second game, was that I remember one of my cousins was playing, and she kept dying because she liked Dixie Kong better than Diddy Kong, so she used to call Diddy the shitty, which is just fucking great. I love it. And yeah, it's forever going to be a game that's always going to remain on top for me, not just with Super Nintendo games, but even just with games of all time, because I think I did do a video response where I did mention, like, you know, top 10 favorite games of all time with everything, which, you know, even that was fucking hard as shit to do. But yeah, I think even with that video, I still managed to put this game on top of everything. And yes, maybe it is because it is one of the very first games I ever played, but at the same time though, everything just really worked magically. Like, I don't know how they did it, but it just worked. And I think we're gonna call it here because, yeah, I don't want to drag this out any longer than I have to, but yes, you get the point. I love every single game on this list. I think they're all great for their own reasons, and of course, you know, like I said before, just because I rank something higher than something else doesn't mean I think it's, like, 100% better than it. But yes, that is 30 games on the Super Nintendo that I love a whole lot. And as always, you're more than welcome to list some of your favorites, because I always like hearing different things, and of course, I hope you all have something new to play. And I think the next top 30 on a console that I'm going to do next is going to be on the Sega Saturn. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that one next, as it will be quite interesting. So, with that being said, thanks for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.